A war that tore a nation in two. A conflict that cost more American lives than any other. The American Civil War was not just a battle of armies, but a battle of ideologies. Freedom versus oppression, Union versus secession. Over 600,000 lives were lost. Brother fought against brother, and the fate of a nation hung in the balance. But how did this war begin? How did it shape the United States as we know it today? This is the American Civil War, a nation divided and reunited. The seeds of the Civil War were planted long before the first shots were fired. The United States, founded on the principles of liberty, was divided on the issue of slavery. While the North moved toward industrialization and opposed the expansion of slavery, the Southern economy relied on enslaved labor to sustain its vast cotton and tobacco plantations. Tensions escalated with the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850, temporary measures that attempted to balance power between free and slave states. But in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act ignited further conflict, allowing states to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, leading to a series of violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. Then came 1857. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision ruled that African Americans were not citizens and had no legal rights, further deepening national divisions. The final breaking point? The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a president who opposed the expansion of slavery. Southern states saw his victory as a direct threat to their way of life. Fearing that their rights and slavery would be abolished, South Carolina became the first state to withdraw from the Union in December 1860. Over the next few months, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. In February 1861, these states formed the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. Lincoln, in his inaugural address, urged unity, stating, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." But the Confederacy was already preparing for war. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on the Union's Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Outmanned and outgunned, Major Robert Anderson eventually surrendered, marking the beginning of the American Civil War. Both sides believed the war would be short-lived. The first major battle, the First Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, shattered that illusion. Each side engaged in battle with around 18,000 troops, all poorly trained and lacking leadership. The Union, expecting a swift victory, was defeated by Confederate General Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, earning him his legendary nickname. Lincoln realized that defeating the Confederacy would require more than just political speeches. It would take a massive military effort. The Union, under General Winfield Scott, devised the Anaconda Plan, a strategy to strangle the South by blockading posts and controlling the Mississippi River. Meanwhile, Confederate General Robert E. Lee emerged as the South's most brilliant military leader, leading numerous daring and bold campaigns against the Union in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. While battlefields decided much of the war, the fight for information played an equally critical role. Both the Union and the Confederacy relied heavily on spies, informants, and secret networks to gain the upper hand. The Union's Pinkerton Detective Agency gathered intelligence for Lincoln, while the Confederacy relied on the Secret Service Bureau to infiltrate enemy lines. One of the most famous spies of the war was Belle Boyd, a Confederate sympathizer who charmed Union officers into revealing critical military plans. At just 17 years old, Boyd risked her life delivering information to Southern generals, helping the Confederacy secure key victories. On the Union side, Harriet Tubman used her knowledge of Southern terrain and the Underground Railroad network to spy for the North, leading daring reconnaissance and rescue missions. These covert operations shaped the course of battles and sometimes turned the tide of war. By 1862, the war was dragging on, and the Union needed a turning point. That moment came on September 17, 1862 at the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history with over 22,000 casualties. Though inconclusive, the battle gave Lincoln the opportunity he needed. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. While it didn't immediately end slavery, it changed the war's purpose, from preserving the Union to fighting for human freedom. It also prevented European nations from supporting the Confederacy, shifting the tide in the Union's favor. The year 1863 marked a turning point. In July, the Union won two major victories. The first at the Battle of Gettysburg, fought between July 1st and July 3rd in 1863, General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North was stopped. The Confederacy never recovered from their losses. The second, during the Siege of Vicksburg on July 4, 1863, the Union, led by Ulysses S. Grant, took control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. Lincoln later honored the fallen at Gettysburg, delivering the famous Gettysburg Address, reminding Americans that the war was about preserving a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The Civil War saw the emergence of a new form of naval warfare, submarine combat. The Confederacy, desperate to break the Union blockade, developed the CSS Hunley, the first combat submarine to successfully sink an enemy warship. On the night of February 17, 1864, the Hunley, armed with a spar torpedo, attacked the USS Housatonic, Union warship off the coast of Charleston. The explosion sank the Housatonic in minutes, marking the first successful submarine attack in history. However, the Hunley mysteriously disappeared after the mission, only to be discovered over 130 years later at the bottom of the ocean. While the technology was still primitive, the use of submarines foreshadowed the future of naval warfare. In November 1864, the Union's General William Tecumseh Sherman launched his infamous March to the Sea. A 60,000-strong force marched 285 miles over 5 weeks from Atlanta to Savannah in Georgia, devastating the South's military infrastructure and terrorizing the civilian population. The Confederacy were left horrified, frightened, and demoralized. Meanwhile, General Grant relentlessly pursued Lee's army. On April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, cornered, General Lee surrendered to Grant, effectively ending the war. Just days later, the nation was plunged into mourning. On the night of April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. As he sat in his private box, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, slipped in and fired a single bullet into the back of Lincoln's head. Booth leaped onto the stage, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, before escaping. The president was carried across the street to the Peterson boarding house, where he died the following morning, April 15, 1865. The assassination was part of a larger conspiracy to destabilize the Union government. Booth was later tracked down and killed in a Virginia barn, while several of his co-conspirators were arrested and executed. Lincoln's death was a devastating blow to a nation already fractured by war. He had envisioned a peaceful Reconstruction, urging unity and healing between the North and South. Instead, his assassination left the country in turmoil, paving the way for a more turbulent and contentious period of rebuilding. The war ended, but the struggle for equality had just begun. The 13th Amendment officially ended slavery, but Reconstruction proved difficult. Former Confederate states resisted change, and racial tensions and violence persisted, particularly in the South. One of the most brutal forms of racial terrorism was lynching. Despite efforts by activists like Ida B. Wells, who campaigned tirelessly, it remained a widespread practice well into the 20th century, reinforcing racial oppression long after the war had ended. The end of the Civil War may have preserved the Union, ended slavery, and set the stage for America's future, but its legacy provided many more challenges. The American Civil War remains one of the most defining moments in U.S. history. It was a war of ideals, sacrifice, and transformation. It grew the power of the federal government, shifting power away from sovereign states, whilst leaving a legacy of segregation and poverty in the South. What lessons do you think we can learn from this conflict? We hope you'll join us for more deep dives into history. Until next time.